This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Maloney, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Welcome to the Heroic Voice. This is Saturday, April 12th. I'm here with Ray Riethmeier, fan. I want to get a fan's perspective. We haven't had a lot of that. It's also a lawyer, as I understand it. Yes. And a Liberty Girl aficionado. So, Ray, glad to have you.
That's,
Pleasure to
Thank
meet you
you.
face to face. You've been, sending us money off and on for quite a long time, which I really appreciate.
Yep.
Before I get started, I want to encourage people, please, to like, share, subscribe. It's the only way we build viewership on this channel is if people let people know that it exists. Ray, what would you like to talk about first? Comics in general, yourself, Liberty Girl?
Let's start with the comics. You mentioned that I've been uh, enjoying your comics for a lot of years now, so we could start with that.
Let's do that
Um,
then.
yeah, I really have been more active reading heroic comics uh, since you did that free comic book day issue a bunch of years back that's featured the Liberty Girl, and that just jumped out at me as being something special. I mean, as soon as I read it, I knew this is right up my alley. I'm a longtime fan of classic comics. I love particularly DC Comics with their long legacy of heritage characters that go back to the Golden Age, and the Liberty Girl comics really seem to capture that same sort of feel, where you had a connection to the Golden Age, but with modern storytelling sensibility. It was really something I enjoyed. So I thought immediately that you had a hit on your hands, and I thought I was going to be the biggest thing in the market. Sadly, it didn't quite reach out as far as any of us were hoping.
Oh, certainly
But
not. We just don't have the resources that Marvel and DC have to publicize and promote. But Liberty Girl has been staying here. Let me ask you which one it was. Was it the Liberty Girl number zero or the Liberty Comics number zero that you first saw?
um, oh, that's a good question. I think it was the one. I'm just trying. I have my copy of the trade paperback,
Aha.
and I think it has yeah, it has the covers on it. So I know it was yeah, it was the Liberty Girl Free Comic Book Day.
The one that
That,
had a actually had a flare backup story in it, as I remember.
that's the one. Yeah. So that was
Yes.
June 2006. So it's been almost 20 years now that I've been following Heroic fairly closely. And I do, as I said, I really like the heritage that you've embedded into the stories. So I particularly like the Liberty Girl and the Liberty Comics. I've enjoyed uh, the Huntsman for the connections there. I've been picking up some of the other ones that tend to relate or tie in. So anytime you have crossovers, I tend to dip my toe in a little bit. I haven't bought everything that you've published,
Oh, I
but
wouldn't expect you to buy everything. Not everything
yeah,
that we do is to everyone's taste.
yeah, but
Chrissy Claus,
yeah.
for example, is aimed at a somewhat different audience than the Liberty Girl.
Well, yeah, but going farther back, I mean, even back, in your earlier publishing days, I really liked Eternity Smith. That was the comic that grabbed me early on when I was um, enjoying a lot of the wide variety that the independent comic publishers were providing, and that was one of the ones that I really liked a lot back in the day. So I'm glad to see, promise of some more Eternity Smith here and there showing up. I think the next Huntsman,
Yeah,
is that the,
one more
yeah,
Eternity Smith story.
yeah,
It's been sitting on the shelf for a long time. I'm sure that Rick Hoberg will be glad to hear that Eternity Smith was what attracted you. But
yeah. So I got that too. I've got the hardcover bound
oh
edition
my
from back
goodness,
then.
that dates back from way back when. You
Yeah,
got to
that's
be
just,
careful with that.
just trying to prove my 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 bona fides here.
Ah, all righty. The attachment to the past was deliberate. That yeah, the whole premise of it is that there have always been extra normal special people around, whether they were called gods or heroes or stuff like that. They've been there since forever, right? So, and this is true in a literary sense as well, right? Superheroes are just the latest iteration of the special characters, whether it's Gilgamesh or yeah, Odysseus, whoever it is in there. It's just humans do that. They give attributes to their heroes that are make them larger than life.
Right,
Um,
and we're drawn to people who have those extraordinary abilities. And again, to bring back Liberty Girl, I mean that's one of the things that jumped out at me was the way you subtly uh, tied her in to the Pulp Fiction world with the suggestion that she's related to Doc Savage,
and that
who's
once that comes into public domain, which is only a few years away, there's nothing to stop me from making that explicit. Right?
yeah. But there's certainly enough in there. I mean, with Senator Brooks, I think we know who he is, in the
Uh,
Doc Savage world. Um, and so, and since he's an attorney, the fact that he showed up was another major draw for me because that's what I do for a living. I am an attorney. I work, however, as an editor for a law publisher, one of the major law publishers, and
Want to give him a plug?
I no,
Okay.
that's fine. Um, I Yeah, I've been working for them for 30 years now, and it's dry work, but I enjoy being able to apply my legal expertise to the publishing world in my own way, and I've been able to do some side jobs, working in the Pulp Fiction community mostly, doing some editing. With I've actually edited a bunch of the Doc Savage novels that Will Murray's been writing for the last 15 years.
Oh,
Well,
really?
not for the last few years because he doesn't have the license anymore, but the ones that he was writing up until Condé Nast decided that they were going to pull the license in hopes that they'd get a movie out of it or something.
Hmm.
But so that was a highlight of my career, being able to actually contribute my editing skills to the Doc Savage series for a while.
Yeah, I love Doc. Doc remains a very good character. Just,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, Liberty Girl news, I suppose we could touch on that if you'd like to know what's coming up.
Oh, sure, yeah.
We finally got the last two pages of artwork for the sixth issue of Liberty Girl from Chris Marinan. So that's sitting here. My colorist is working on another project at the moment, but as soon as he's done with that, which is an issue of League of Champions, the remaining 8 pages of story that haven't been colored yet for Liberty Girl #6 are going to go right to him. And as soon as we have the coloring done, right, the lettering is already finished. It's off to the printer. after all this time. So you won't have too much longer to wait for that to come out to you.
Yeah. And then we just have to wait for the seventh issue.
The seventh issue is in fact being worked on. That's going to be kind of an anthology kind of story where it takes place around a campfire. In Liberty Girl #6, you're going to see Flare and Icicle presenting Liberty Girl with a bunch of allies, right? Basically a group of girl guardians, 10 different superpowered women that the Liberty Girl can call on whenever she needs help in a Mission Impossible kind of situation, right? In Liberty Girl #7, we sit down with Liberty Girl, Flare, the Black Enchantress, and Sparkplug, and the G Girl, right? And it's sort of an homage to All-Star Comics #2. They each tell a story, right?
Okay.
A little 5, 6 page story about something that's happened to them that was scary, right? Because you're doing horror stories around a campfire. And some of the stories are scarier than others. And some of them are not really scary at all. But what do you mean that wasn't scary? I was scared. You ever had your mom go on you? That's scary, right? That's the G Girl story.
Yeah.
So,
So does that mean if they're going to be telling the stories like All-Star #2, does that mean the next issue will have them forming a team
in
like
fact,
All-Star
that
#3?
happens I'd originally intended it for a Champions annual, but we're not doing annuals anymore. So I had then shifted over, figuring it'd be in Liberty Girl #7, right? But the story that they're teaming up on is really more the G Girl story. So what I did was I put that anthology thing, Liberty Girl #7, and the team up story is actually going to appear in Sensational G Girl #9. Right. And then that one, they go off on a USO tour to Korea. That's actually the cover story for the espionage mission that they're going to be working on, which is to try to find a clue that will lead them to the G Girl's missing mother.
All right. Well, I guess that's another issue I'll have to add to my to buy list.
Uh, but those are on tap, and work has been done both on that campfire story and on the Korea story, which you can see, by the way, if you go to the Heroic Publishing website and click on the Sensational G Girl link. Or no, I guess you can't see that yet because Sensational G Girl #8 is up there. Trust me, though, work has been done on it. So
It's coming.
it is
Okay.
coming. It is coming. And I think, not to toot my own horn, but I think that these are pretty good. Those issues will be very good. So,
Excellent.
and as I said, once Doc gets into public domain, I fully intend to take the stories that are in public domain and print them somewhere, since we'll be able to do that. But not yet.
All right. Well, since I have experience editing Doc Savage, keep me in mind if you want
I
some help.
will. I will. Maybe, yeah, that would be good to get some input from you on it. All right, other comic books. You are a
Um,
comic book fan. There must
I
be
am
other
a
things that
comic.
you like.
I I I've always been a DC guy at heart, and so um, I I followed comics since before I could read them. My parents would buy them for me, and I would just look at the pictures, and I would come up with my own stories for them based on what I saw. And so in some cases, it was kind of surprising when I got old enough to actually read them and realized this is a completely different story than I thought it was.
Uh-huh.
But um, I was reading them, my preteens into my teens, and really, I kind of stepped away from comics at about DC actually kind of shot themselves in the foot by providing me the perfect out when they did two things at roughly the same time. One was Kingdom Come, which was sort of the final story set in the future of all the characters that we've come to know and love. And then almost at the same time, they did Zero Hour, which
Yeah.
was, hey, we're going to reboot and start everything from scratch, which came at the perfect time for me to say, all right, I guess I'm done then. You
Yeah.
gave me an ending. I'm not going to start at a new beginning. And so I lost I lost track of DC Comics and all comics for a decade or so. My life was changing. I was getting married and starting working, and and somewhere along the line, I always kind of kept peeking back to see what was going on, and every once in a while something would be interesting enough for me to um, want to see what was going on. And it really wasn't until uh, DC did the JSA series, just the three initials. I think that was in the late 90s that started,
Yes. Mhm.
like 99 or something.
It was an
Um,
exemplary comic book. That series was very good.
That was yeah, and that was a great series for me to jump back into because these were legacy characters, really respecting the history of the DC line going all the way back to World War II. And so that pulled me back in, and I started exploring the other things. My favorite as a kid was probably the Legion of Superheroes, and at that point, they weren't anything like what I remembered them because they'd rebooted them and three booted them and
Right.
retro booted them. And, it's just, I didn't know who these people were anymore.
I don't think
Um,
DC knows who those people are anymore.
yeah, it's a shame. I would love to see. I mean, I'm glad that they keep reprinting them, but the ones they keep reprinting are the older ones.
Mhm.
And maybe they should get a hint that says, people are buying the classic Legion of Superheroes characters. Let's give the people what they want.
Yeah, those are the
Uh,
Edmund Hamilton and the Jerry Siegel stories from
right.
the
Or
60s,
even the Jim Shooters, or
from later.
into,
Yeah.
Mike Grell and Dave Cockrum in the 70s. And you get to Paul Levitz and Keith Giffen in the 80s. I mean, they, there were a lot of really good runs with those characters. And uh, I don't know why they thought they needed to keep changing things. I think it was probably just a result of the misstep of getting rid of Superboy
Mhm.
after the Crisis on Infinite Earths. When you remove Superboy, it makes telling Legion of Superheroes stories very difficult.
Well, maybe I might argue with you on that because
All
back
right.
when the Legion first started doing their Tales of the Legion of Superheroes and Adventure comics, Superboy wasn't there all the time.
Well,
There was
that's true,
it was
but he
shorter
still
stories, right?
existed as
10 to
the
12
as
page
the
stories that focused usually on a single Legionnaire. It was only a year or so into it that they actually started doing the larger scale stories with the entire team.
yeah,
Um,
but once you remove Superboy as the inspiration for the Legion,
mhm.
then you kind of lose the heart, the soul that gave them their purpose.
Yeah,
And
I would
and they
agree with you
tried
in
to
that respect.
replace him with, like what was it, the Pocket Universe Superboy that, wasn't the real Superboy. And then they tried to replace him with Mon-El, who interestingly enough was my favorite character, but I didn't like him as a replacement for Superboy. So they just kept trying to apply patches to the chronology, and the patches didn't work. And that's, I think, why they decided, well, let's reboot it. And that didn't work. So let's reboot it. And that didn't work. It's just a shame that they can't. At this point, I was actually in the comic store that I frequent a week or two back, and I picked up a few series that DC is doing right now that I'm enjoying, and I brought them up to the counter, and the guy, was ringing them up, and we got to talking, and I said, and I hadn't even thought about this until it came out of my mouth. I said, I'm really digging what DC is doing lately, and it feels as if somebody who's like a creative control guy is saying, let's try to bring back the classics, the heart of these characters. Because for so long, it seems like they were veering away from what made the characters special. And I'm seeing I'm seeing the characters behaving the way I remember them behaving when I was younger, instead of something new and hip and trying to reach an audience that really isn't there. I think the audience that's there is the people who still want to keep buying all the old reprints that, those are
Yeah.
selling real well. So let's give people stories like the old
From an
reprints.
editorial perspective, I understand what DC was trying to do. They were trying to reach out to what they considered to be a potential new audience, but not really understanding that the thing that made the characters attractive in the past is what would make them attractive to a new audience, right?
Yeah.
Instead of trying to cater, and this is what I would have done, right? Instead of trying to cater to what they think the audience is like out there these days, see if you can bring back what made the characters attractive in the first place, which is pretty much exactly what you said, right?
Yeah.
What was it about Superman that made him attractive? What was it about Batman that made him attractive? You can ask what it was about Wonder Woman that made her attractive, but you wouldn't get a good answer to that because she was never a popular character, right? Wonder Woman is one of those strange anomalies that had to do more with maintaining the license to the character,
Right.
right?
Yes, they just had to keep publishing Wonder Woman,
Yeah,
regardless of whether the audience really wanted her. But yeah, I think the missteps that DC took for a long time was that they were alienating the fans that had embraced their characters in the past.
I
And
think
it
that's exactly right.
seems to me that what they're doing now is more uh, designed to appeal to the people that still remember the characters the way they had been.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's working for me anyway.
Well,
I'm
good. I'm
I'm
glad to hear that.
yeah.
There was
And
a,
that's what I like about your comics too, because they just feel like classic comics done well. And
well,
I enjoy them.
what I try to do, I haven't touched on this much. The real question that I ask, because we were talking about earlier about, the tradition of superpowered people in literature. My approach is these are real people, right? Who just happen to have special abilities. It's not quite the same thing that Stan and Jack were doing back in the 60s. And so the question I have to ask myself is, right, if Flair is a real person, right, with the background that she has, how would she behave when she's trying to present herself in a favorable way to people that she was trying to kill a few days ago, right?
Mhm.
And the story goes from there. That's why Flair had displayed the personality that she did in the early Champions comic books. She was trying to be non-threatening, right? She was trying to be useful, right? As she got more comfortable being a member of the League of Champions, her real personality traits started to appear, right? So
Mhm.
if you take those early stories with Flair and go through them, you'll see her changing a bit, growing a bit, as a real personality comes out. She doesn't say golly very much anymore, although she will occasionally lapse back into that. It's the same thing with all the other characters. You talk about the Black Enchantress, for example. She's evil. The Black
Mhm.
Enchantress is an extremely evil, wicked person who thinks the world is her oyster and will dispose of anyone that she thinks is actually a threat to her. Now, this actually makes her useful to the huntsmen, to the heroes, because they can rely on the Black Enchantress to help them dispose of threats to the world. The Black Enchantress knows that she's being indulged. So again, she tries to present herself in a non-threatening way, all the while holding in the back of her head that if it ever comes to it, she'll kill them all.
Mhm.
So watch the character from that perspective, and you can actually see what's going on. You can read between the lines. You can see how she's actually thinking if where she's really coming from. So
Right.
it's not
It's an
something that I
extra
spell
layer.
out. It's something that you have to pick up in context,
Right.
right? So,
Yep.
um, did you ever look at the Marvel characters? Or,
I um y- to a certain extent, but never really deep dives and embracing them thoroughly. I mean, I enjoyed. I think mostly it was I would follow a particular comic writer or artist that I had enjoyed when I saw that they were taking on
Ah,
a series at Marvel. So, like when Walt Simonson did Thor,
yeah,
I was all over
wonderful,
that. I loved
wonderful
his
sequence.
stuff
Yeah,
because I'd known him from Manhunter and the Metal Men at DC, and uh, so his Thor run was a must buy for me. I loved that series. I was curious about what what John Byrne was going to do when he took over Hulk. So I read that, but that didn't last long. He
and it
just did
wasn't.
that for like 6 issues before he moved over to DC to reboot Superman.
Yeah, John's take
Um,
on the Hulk didn't work as well as his take on some of the other characters that he.
yeah, but I kept reading the Hulk after he left because I enjoyed what they they uh,
The
they had
Peter
to
David.
quickly carry on after he left, and ultimately who was then an unknown, Peter David,
Yeah,
ended up writing it. And boy, did he make that an interesting series to read for a bunch of years. That
very
was
interesting. Yes,
that was probably the one series I read the longest of any Marvel title, largely because of the way Peter David kept it interesting, and he would keep, just basically changing the premise every couple years. Just when you think you know what he's doing with it, he'd switch it up and he'd send him to Las Vegas for a while as a mobster. And it's like, well, that was unexpected. And then, it was always an unexpected twist. So that kept it fun.
well, Peter understood something that was implicit in the character, which was the multiple personalities notion,
Yes.
right? So Peter would just explore one of those alternate personalities for a while. It was, how should I put this? It was clever, and it allowed him to keep freshness in what he was doing.
Yeah.
So I give him props for that. It
Right.
was a good take on the Hulk, right?
Right. And then, he Peter David went and started writing Star Trek for DC, which I enjoyed a lot. I loved his run on Star Trek. I'm a fan of the original series mostly. And so when he was writing the original series Star Trek comic, that was great. Until he ran into problems with the guy at their licensing office, and he basically had to stop writing it. But by then he was writing Dreadstar for First Comics
Hmm.
and basically took some of the ideas that he was going to write for Star Trek and applied it to the Dreadstar character, and actually had like cartoony versions of Captain Kirk and everybody interacting with Dreadstar for a
Oh,
few
that's
issues.
funny.
That was a hoot. But
So,
but First Comics, so now that I've mentioned that, I started at the beginning of this conversation mentioning I was really into the variety of what the independent publishers were doing back in the 80s. And man, First Comics was my favorite of the independent publishers back then. They had so many interesting titles and amazing creators signing on. They had Mike Grau doing John Sable and Star Slayer. Uh, they had Howard Chaykin on American Flag. They uh, Joe Staton bringing back E-Man. Uh,
Roy Thomas with Alter Ego.
Warwick Thomas without there's our connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. With
I
some
I
new
think
Alter Ego stories in the works as well. We've got three more issues that Ron Harris has been working on.
oh,
Uh,
that'll be great.
the sixth issue is done, still needs to be colored and lettered, but it's up there on the schedule. I don't know how long we're going to take to get to it with our
See,
limited
this
resources.
you're definitely catering to the old school comic fans like me. So thank you for that.
Well, you're
Uh,
welcome.
yeah, but I think First Comics was probably the only publisher ever in that I was, you might remember people would talk about Marvel zombies who would buy everything that Marvel bought, no matter what it was, and then they'd complain when they came out with the Star Comics line. It's like, oh, now we have to buy whatever. It's like you don't have to buy anything, but I was pretty much a first zombie for a while. I don't think there was any first comic that I wasn't buying because you could just trust that whatever they were putting out was worth reading.
Yeah.
And so that was a great line. Um, but I enjoyed a lot of stuff that Eclipse did, um, uh, Pacific before them, um, and of course, you know what you were doing at the time. I liked Americomics or AC Comics as they switched their name to, and they're still plugging along these days
They
too.
are. Yeah, they were before me. And they're still doing some good stuff.
Yeah.
What about Comics Interview Group, the X Thieves, Southern Knights?
I enjoyed X Thieves. I read a few issues of the Southern Knights. Um, I think I had problems with that one because it wasn't always reader friendly for a new reader. Because I picked up a few issues and it's like I have no idea who these people are and what's going on. Some of the other independent publishers seem to do a pretty good job of giving summaries of, if you're just joining us, here's what's
Yeah.
happening. And I never had any idea what was going on when I would pick up an issue of Southern Nights. Maybe I was just dense, but
Well, I'm sure
or maybe
Henry
I
will be
picked up the
happy to
wrong
hear that.
issues.
But, yeah.
But yeah, but yeah, your Southern Nights crossed over, or the Southern Nights crossed over with your titles
Yeah,
too,
we
right?
did. Yeah, and that's actually available now in a hardbound volume, the entire Morgan Wars sequence,
All right.
which I highly recommend to people to purchase because it will help Henry as well as us. Um, you know,
And if it stands alone well, even I would understand it.
yeah, it does actually. I think we did a pretty good job of introducing the Champions to Southern Knights readers and the Southern Knights to Champions readers. I think we did pretty well with that.
All
So
right. Well, then maybe that's something I should add to my reading list.
I would recommend it. Um, yeah,
Yeah, makes
is there
sense.
anything you'd like to tell us about yourself? You mentioned because we're getting close to our 30-minute mark here.
Oh,
Let's talk
sure.
briefly about Ray Riethmeier. What do
All
you do?
right. Well, Ray Riethmeier, as I said, I'm an attorney, but I also work as an editor. I'm also, you know, I can do a nice segue here because we started with Liberty Girl and we're talking about the heritage of these characters and that she goes back to the pulp characters like Doc Savage. I've always liked finding that link, and if you're familiar with the Philip Jose Farmer's world building with the Wold Newton universe,
Hmm.
with all the characters, the literary characters being interrelated in a complicated way. Um, it's not hard to imagine that like Doc Savage, who is established as somebody who is trained by a variety of experts in numerous fields to be raised to become this this
Superman.
troubleshooter to solve problems around the world. It's not hard to imagine that one of the people that trained him was probably an elderly Sherlock Holmes.
One would expect
I
so.
am a dyed-in-the-wool fan of Sherlock Holmes and the stories that Arthur Conan Doyle created. Um, and I'm pleased that in the last few years I've been able to apply my editing skills to actually bring some new anthologies of Sherlock Holmes stories into the world. Um, I've been working with Belanger Books, a great small publisher that focuses on Sherlock Holmes publications, but they're doing other things too. Like they've got some dark fantasy kind of stuff, and they've done some sequels to Jane Eyre.
Oh,
So they do a variety of things,
why
but
don't you
largely,
give people that website address so they can go check it out?
well, I think I'm pretty sure it's BelangerBooks.com. Um, and I started publishing, working with them a few years ago. They reached out to me uh, when uh, when I was in New York. Every January, the Baker Street Irregulars, the group of the devotees of Sherlock Holmes gather in New York around the time of January 6th, which has been established to be Sherlock Holmes's birthday. And I was I went as a fan because I just wanted to be there with other fans. And one day I was just chatting with Derek Belanger, the guy behind Belanger Books, and he said to me that they had a project that needed an editor, and he asked if I'd be interested in working on it. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And so that turned out to be actually a set of two Sherlock Holmes books that was right up my alley because they're two books of Sherlock Holmes crossovers. One
Ah,
was Sherlock Holmes Stranger Than Fiction, in which Holmes encountered other famous characters from literature, all in the public domain. And the other one was Stranger Than Truth, in which Holmes meets famous characters from history. And so that was, I got those
cool.
right there. Nice uh, companion pieces to each other. And then I guess the Belangers liked what I did, and they asked me to pitch some other projects for them. So the next book that I did with them was one that uh, I I was amazed that nobody had ever done it before because you everybody has heard of Sherlock Holmes as the world's first consulting detective. It's how he described himself. That when the official police force found themselves in over their heads, they would come to him and lay the case out before them, and he could set them on the right path. A consulting detective, kind of like a consulting surgeon or something.
Yes.
It was, and but most of the stories that Dr. Watson wrote, that Conan Doyle wrote, but it's written from the perspective of Watson. Most of the stories that we read of Sherlock Holmes are where clients come directly to him,
Yes.
and he's
Mhm.
more acting more like a private detective than a consulting detective. And so I pitched to them, I said, let's do a book that focuses on him
As a
as the
consultant.
last resort for other
Yes.
detectives.
Uh,
So we did uh, the consultations of Sherlock Holmes,
ooh,
which was a lot of fun. I was just so pleased to be able to bring that into the world. And right now, we are working on a book of Sherlock Holmes 5 Minute Mysteries. There's an Australian writer named Kel Richards who wrote a series of Sherlock Holmes books for younger readers back in
oh,
the
that's excellent.
1990s.
Yes.
They were Sherlock Holmes's Tales of Terror, and those were written with the idea that they would appeal to the younger readers who liked R.L. Stein's Goosebumps books.
Hmm.
But the interesting thing about that series was that he would work in Christian morals and perspectives into the stories, which we'd
Oh,
never seen with the Conan Doyle stories
right.
because Conan Doyle had kind of turned his back on Christianity and gone deep into spiritualism. But Victorian gentlemen would probably have
Mhm.
been good churchgoers at the time. And so it wouldn't necessarily be out of character for Holmes and Watson to voice their Christian perspectives. And so
True.
Kel Richards had done that back in the 90s. He's now got a series of 50 very short 5 minute mysteries, playfair stories where you lay out the clues and then you get to a point where it's, how does Holmes know who did it? Turn the page and read the
Aha.
solution. And then you
Right?
get the solution and a little moral. It's
Great.
delightful, I think. And so I'm hoping that it's the sort of thing that will reach people that can be, I don't know, drawn a little closer to God. I
Well,
think
Ray,
that's an
thank
important
you.
thing that
Thank
we
you very
need.
much. We
Yeah.
are running out of time.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dennis.
But I
But
mean, this has been a great conversation. I want to, if there's social media that people can follow you on, let's do that quickly, and then we'll call it a night.
all right, well, I'm on Facebook. My Facebook is facebook.com/RightVector, RIGHTVECTOR. Um, the 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 5 Minute Mysteries book is currently running on Kickstarter
Oh,
until I